This episode is brought to you by BigMooseCoffeeCompany.co. Pals, welcome. Welcome to another episode of Everything Endurance. It's been a week already, coming round thick and fast, these episodes, aren't they? Thank you once again. I know I say it every time, but thanks for the likes, the comments, the shares, the people who've got in touch with us. We really appreciate it. This podcast is really feeling like a two-way conversation now, and I'm absolutely thriving in that. So thank you very much. And on that note, I want to hear your suggestions. I keep asking. If you are sat there now thinking, okay, I'm looking forward to this interview, but I really wish he'd talk to X, or I'd love to hear an interview with Y, then tell me, get in touch, and I will contact X, and I will contact Y, and I will try and put something together. That makes it sound like I'm going to do algebra. I'm absolutely not. I hate algebra, but you tell me the adventurer, and I will go out there and find them. I'm not going to do too much waffling on the run into today's episode. You've already read the title, so you're probably as excited about it as I was excited to talk to this person in the first place. But for the benefit of anyone who doesn't know a lot about the guest we're going to speak to today, the first thing I'd suggest is Google the Barkley Marathons and watch any documentary you come across. There's I believe it's still on Netflix, a documentary referred to as the Barkley Marathons, the race that eats its young. Start there and then absorb everything else you can about it. It's absolutely fascinating. But for the uninitiated that aren't going to pause here, go off and Google and come back, a little bit of a roundup. The Barkley Marathons is a race that just captures the imagination of everyone who encounters it. It's a first run back in 1986, and on paper, it's a 100-miler, which consists of 5 20-mile loops. In the grand scheme of things, and some of the monstrous races that are out there, that doesn't sound too awful, right? But that's where anything easy sounding about it ends. Just entering it is going to require some hoop jumping. You're going to need to know who to talk to and when. You aren't just going to be able to Google this and fill in an online application and pay your deposit. There's a lot more to it than that. And even if you've managed to negotiate your way through that application process and your application had enough on there for you to qualify to be allowed on that start line, that's only where the difficulties begin. Abandon all of your electronic devices. You will not be carrying a GPS through this race. You will be using a map and a compass and nothing more sophisticated than that at all along the way. And it is not a marked trail in any way. You're also going to find that trail covers a lot of climbing, like a ridiculous amount of climbing. It's a very mountainous area that it's in. And as a consequence of being in this very mountainous area, the weather is also extremely changeable. Expect hailstorms, freezing cold temperatures, snow, mud, wind, and all those other things that we just love running around in. On top of that, it's generally accepted that it's not a 100-mile race, that in fact each loop is considerably longer than advertised, and since the course changes a little bit each year, there's no way of knowing exactly how far it is you're going to run. You're only going to have 12 hours to complete each of 5 loops, and that clock never stops. So if you decide to sleep, that's your problem. That's coming off your time. In fact, in all the years that it's been run, there have been 35 to 40 people who have run each time. And in all of those years, only 15 runners have ever reached the finish line. Today's guest is also the instigator of the Big's Backyard, the last man standing race format, which is now all over the world. You'll find affiliate races of that in every region of the planet now, and we'll talk a bit more about that format as we go in the episode. We are, of course, talking about Lazarus Lake, more officially known as Gary Cantrell. And one of the first things we're going to talk to him about is, Laz, exactly what is your name? Are you more comfortable with people referring to you as Laz, or are you Gary?
I'm really indifferent to it. It's all the same. I know that my wife will accuse me of having 2 different personalities, but I answer emails all the time, and I'll half the time I look back to see what did they address me as, so I sign off as the same name. So I don't think there's really that much of a divide.
Fair enough. I'm going to stick with Laz then, because that's what I first knew you as. There's no getting around the fact that I was aware of the Barkleys and I was aware of who you were for a good couple of years before I realised that Lazarus Lake wasn't actually your name. It just never occurred to me to question it.
It never occurred to me that people were just one day I realized, oh, hey, people think that it's actually my name.
Okay. Well, how did the name come about then? Why are you now Lazarus Lake?
Email. When email started out, your first email you got at work because people weren't using it for personal use. And your name was either your title or your name, or your title and your name. And I went along and email started becoming a thing people used, and you look and realize, well, I got a bunch of personal stuff in my work email, so I need to get my own email so that the two are not merged together. And I set up a Hotmail account and sat there. When it came to your name, I put my name in, and then I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is email. It's still, you write things and off they go into space. So I don't want my personal business just going anywhere. But I'll put a name on there. I'll just pick a name out and put it on there. And that way, if people know who I am, they'll know who it was from. And if it goes to people who don't know who I am, they won't know who it was. And I just picked Lazarus Lake as kind of a random name to stick in there.
Well,
and then you use email for years, and it becomes so prevalent. And one day, like what we were talking earlier, you realize, hell, half the people that talk to me think that's actually my name.
Yeah, I'm not lying.
People through email and on the internet.
So why Lazarus Lake? Is that literally just the two words off the top of your head at that time, or is there an origin to those words?
No, it was a name I saw during a journey run in a phone book in a little town. Taking my journey runs, when I was younger, I ended up sometimes with a little bit of time at the end of the day before I went to sleep. And in small southern towns, if you pick up the phone book, you find these names that had somehow snuck in there. As some early settler would have some weird off-the-wall name, and then, of course, they multiplied over the years, and so you'd get to Lynchburg, where there's a lot of Bobos. You look in the phone book, and they have Bobos, half a page of Bobos. And this was in Bolivar, and they had Lazarus Lake. And I thought, man, what a cool name. This was in the early 80s. And I don't know why that name had stuck in my head. And 20 years later, I'm setting up an email and think, what name would I put in there? I know.
There it is.
I'll steal this poor old guy's name.
Well, I hope that poor old guy is still out there somewhere getting the occasional confusing email thinking he's the director of the most brutal race in the world. Yeah. After
it started really catching on, I Googled to see, and I couldn't find him. So if he's out there, he doesn't show up on Google, which probably means he's not very much hooked in with what's.
Yeah, he's not quite on the World Wide Web.
Yeah. No. If you do anything at all, you can be Googled.
Well, you went back a little bit there and talked about your journey runs. That's what you were calling it at the time. So, yes. I mean, me and most of the rest of the ultra running world know you now as a race director, but there was a time when you were Gary Cantrell ultra runner, right?
Yes, Gary Cantrell, an ultra runner of no particular note. But I was enthusiastic and I tried hard, and since in today's ultra world is a lot more expansive, my performances look a lot better than they did at the time I was doing them. When I was most active in running, the running community was very small, and I think one of my better runs I ever did, I had a 1:19 half marathon. Again, sorry we're no mask. But I finished up 11th out of 110 people. And I went to watch my son run in a half marathon a few years back. And I was at the finish line waiting for him to come in when it came near that time. And I thought, I'll go see where a 119 would have put me. And it would have been, I think it would have been 12th, but instead of 110 people, there was 3,000. So,
yeah, so you had a serious set of legs. Like, and I mean, I know you still have. We'll talk about your trans-con in a little while, but yeah, that's a pretty well accomplished runner there. How did it start for you? Were you like keenly into sports when you were younger and running was natural, or was it more about the being outdoors in the wilderness?
No, I was my family was very athletically oriented. My dad was a sports star. My son was a really good athlete. And I thought that you should try to make a team when you're in the school teams. I don't know if they're as big in England. I know most of your school teams are not a thing, but in the U.S., if you're in school, if you're an athlete, you're on the school team.
Yeah.
But I was a 5 foot tall, 70-pound sophomore in high school, which is 35 kilograms. I can't relate the height, but if I weighed 35 kilograms, I was skinny at any height.
Yeah.
There were no sports that you can participate in at that size. They didn't have soccer. Wrestling, I would have been 10 kilos lighter than the smallest weight division.
Wow.
So running was kind of all there was. And that's, you go through your whole life thinking things went wrong when they really went right. If I had lived out my dream, I would have been a great football player and my career would have been completely ended about 50 years ago.
Yeah, and the world would have been a poorer place for it. Yeah.
No,
you might have gone on to the Super Bowl last
I wanted, they'd still be talking about it.
Ah, well, there you go. Fair enough. You'd have been a legend whichever way you went. So, I mean, the ultra running, we talk about an ultra running scene these days, and these podcasts I post regularly in one Facebook group that has 32,000 members around the world in that ultra running group. That's not even the biggest one out there. Like, it's become this massive thing. I was reading somewhere in an interview I actually did a little bit of research for this episode, which our regular listeners will know doesn't happen a lot. But you were saying that when you joined your first running club, and it was like the City of Memphis Running Club, and it only had 12 members at the time.
I was member number 12 in the Memphis Running Club. It's a city of around 1 million people. And the races that we had, they had one organized race a year, a 5-miler in Overton Park. And the other races, you went down on Saturday and met at a certain parking lot at a local university, and they had a variety of courses laid out. You had the old wind-up stopwatch, and you would start the watch and toss it under a bush and then race whatever course we decided to race that day. The first guy back pulled the watch out from under the bush and called everyone's time out as they came in.
That's amazing.
And that was a race. You'd have 12 or 15 people. But it was really good times.
Oh, I bet. It must have been a very, very close scene, but... So how did you make the jump from there into ultra running then? There can't have been many ultra marathons around at the time.
But just because I wasn't big enough to play football, I still wanted to be an athlete of great note. So I was very mediocre, but my strength was that I could take a lot of punishment and I worked really hard. So I thought, I would do better at a longer distance. So I moved up from your track and field middle distance to the road races and longer distance, and then to marathons. And even though the first time I heard of ultras, I said it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of and I would never do it. Eventually I went to ultras. The only problem is that the people who moved up all had the exact same attributes that I did, so that I really ended up at every level ensconced at about the same place in the field.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about that, man. Is that maybe why you went into race directing? You needed to punish these people?
I wanted to run my first ultra marathon I directed, because there was not one within 1,000 miles of here.
Wow. Coming from the UK to hear that there's not one within 1,000 miles is ridiculous. You know, if something's 100 miles away, we think it's far.
Yeah, 1,000-mile range. If you lived in the middle of the UK, it would mean there were none on the whole island. So I started the strolling gym so I would have a race to run in. And once again, if there'd been a race, I would have just run someone else's race. But since there wasn't, I did that, and I found that I had more success at directing races than I did running them.
So when was that first race then? And what did you call it? What was the name of that race?
The Strolling Gym 40.
Strolling Gym. That's another name I have to ask you where it comes from.
This is horse country, or was then. The horse industry was one of the biggest things going with the show horses, and the first world champion Tennessee walking horse was named Strolling Jim. When I started the race, I thought to get support from people in the community to put it on, it would be to have some tie to their mothership industry. So we called the race Strolling Jim.
That's a shrewd bit of marketing work there as well. It's a great name for an ultramarathon. How many people were in that first race then?
There were 21 people started, 19 finished. And
that's a good rate.
There were 3 people who had ever run an ultramarathon before.
Wow.
When I started running ultras, the big issue that everyone was talking about was that ultra running had exploded, and there was a great fear that there would come a day when everyone didn't know each other.
I think we might have passed that.
If someone ran ultras, you knew them by name, and if you hadn't met them, you certainly had friends that had. There was at most one degree of separation. And all of the results of all of the 12 or 15 races a year that happened, you read all of the results because you knew all of the people. And if someone who had not run an ultra before, you saw a new name and thought, who is that?
Wow.
It's not like that now.
No, it's certainly a lot less like that now. What were you doing for training back at that time then? If I go online now and Google ultra marathon training plan, I'll get 100 different results. And my problem will be then trying to pick out what works and what doesn't. You're talking about a scene where you knew basically every ultra runner in the US. Like, how are you learning what works and what doesn't work? Is it just a trial and error process there?
We bushwhacked training. Nobody knew anything. I mean, you talked with the other runners, but basically you had to get out and experiment with things. And I think it's been. I'm really glad I had that experience. I can't imagine what it would be like to go in and people look up training plans for 50 milers or for this or for that. It was much more fun to figure it out on my own, and it makes you more aware of the purpose of the things you do. So when I trained for my trans-con, I worked out in my mind a specific series of stages I wanted to go through for specific purposes of what I wanted to accomplish with preparing myself physically. And it worked out really well because I have, almost 60 years of experience preparing my own training plans. And
yeah, well, it obviously worked out. You bagged your trans-con last year, didn't you?
Well, I survived it.
Yeah.
when your sample size is 1, I either did it the best possible way or the worst possible way, or somewhere in between, but you'll never actually know. I know I'm repeating the same basic training plan for the next one.
Oh, wow. Not wanting to leap ahead too far, but have you chosen the next one?
Yes, north to south. Angle Inlet, Minnesota to Key West, Florida. The northernmost point in the 48 states and to the southernmost point.
That's amazing. And I mean, I was about to ask when, but that's forgetting that we're all currently locked up and everything else.
An incredible stroke of luck. It was planned all along for next summer. The first one I did all out, and it took a whole year to recover. I wanted to see if I could do one all out. I don't want to see if I can do a second one all out. And so the next one is planned at a more leisurely pace where that I can not hurt myself.
Yeah, because if I read right, you finished the Transcon with, was it a stress fracture in your hip?
I tore the labrum. I thought it was a stress fracture, but it turns out it was probably a torn labrum. And that was the big thing that really took a year to heal.
Yeah, man, that's a big injury. You carried that for about 500 miles of the journey as well.
Yeah, it happened with about 500 miles to go, and you think, okay, if my leg will stay under me, if it won't just collapse, then you have to finish. You're so close. And then you turn around and think the other way, but 500 miles is really pretty far to go hurt.
Yeah. Well, you know now because you did do it.
Well, I thought, I said, well, if this is a permanent injury, I'll regret it, but I'm willing to have that happen. I'm not going to start this all over again and do the first 2,800 miles again.
So we might as well talk about the Transcon now that we've got onto it. When have you had the Transcon idea just buzzing around in your head for like a couple of decades now? I've got to do this at some point, or did it just come to you? Why did you decide now? Right, I'm going out there. I'm going to do this.
It was since a kid. I always wanted to do it. I wish, and part of me wishes I could have done it when I was younger because I could have done it so much faster and had a more credible performance. Part of me wonders if I really had the mental toughness to survive it when I was younger. But you have your family and your job, and getting that amount of time off is not feasible for a lot of people. I do tell people who ask, I think everyone should do it, and you should do it when you're young. Don't wait till you're old. Find a way and make it happen, because it's a pretty difficult thing.
I mean, what an incredible way to learn about the country you live in, though. Like you must have encountered so many people along the way. Was it a positive experience the whole way through?
There were thousands of human encounters. Every single one of them was positive. You saw the country in a way. I chose my route. Part of it was it's the long highway across the country. And as I told myself starting about Iowa, boy, that was a great idea. How smart was that? You think about how many hundreds of miles closer you could be to the finish. And it was also the place where I'd gone the fewest, or had been through the least. I only went through one really long stretch that I had been to before in a vehicle. And even that, although it was across Idaho, and you think, oh, it's just 300 miles of desert. No, there's so much to see, so much difference. The world is composed of small geographical areas that are just unique. I thought it would be neat to take a map of the U.S. and divide it not into states, but into the Great Black Swamp and the Driftless Zone and the Great Basin and all the different geographical features that are unique. And then you talk to people as you go through there and hear them make references like of going through the Great Black Swamp, which it's a long story, but they end up with sand on top of the black, rich earth, and then have sand hills on top of it. And he's looking at his field, and you see the row of corn going across there. And when it starts up over the hill, the soil turns from black to almost white. And the plants go from this big to that big.
Wow.
And he said, yeah, the high sand is really bad here.
Wow.
When you think anywhere else in the world, you would talk about the high sand. No one would know what you were talking about.
No, not at all.
Because of the way that area, that the physically that area formed, they have that unique structure of the land, and it's just part of their language. You say it's a high sand to someone from there, they know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think part of what you're talking about there is part of the draw for doing a trans-con of the US for people from outside America as well. Like, you know, I could run across the UK, but I'll start in drizzle and I'll end in drizzle. You know, what you've got in the US is, and you put it somewhere that, you know, you're incredibly lucky to have this vast area that you can cross without even needing a passport. You know, you can walk all of it.
Nobody really appreciates what a unique thing in history that you can go out and carry your stuff with you and be totally, no bodyguards, no one looking after you. You have no political or really no areas that are in disarray. We hope. But even with the supposed divide in America today, I stay one night. You stay with people who had a Clinton sticker on their bumper, and the next night I stay with people who had a giant. Their whole front wall was a billboard of Trump, and there's not the great gulf between people that everyone. They were. Actually, the people from the night before ate with me and the people that were the night after, and everyone got along. And they said afterwards, they said, you know, this was really great because I would never ordinarily have sat down and eaten with these people, and they're just good people.
I think when I've spoken to other people who've gone off and done endurance challenges that have taken them all over the world into places where people would have told them not to go. I interviewed a woman yesterday who ran across Kyrgyzstan, and everyone told her she was insane to go, but everyone always says the same thing, which is person to person, people are lovely. You don't run into a lot of people that want to screw you over. And ultimately, if people seeing that you're doing this challenging thing and it's unusual, that their first drive is to want to help you along.
I think that in a way, it's in everybody doesn't recognize or not, they would like to do something like that. And in making if they just give you a bottle of water, then they have a piece of your journey. Yeah,
absolutely. They get to become a part of that challenge as well. And people like to share those types of experiences. And so, I mean, I'm really glad the Trans-Con went well. I'm really glad you're looking at the next challenge as well. But there's no way we're going to be able to get through this podcast without me asking you about the Barkleys. So we're going to have to go back to that.
It's just a little foot race in the woods.
Yeah, it's not a big deal, right? I mean, at what point did it tip for you from being, for the longest time, because this race, for anyone who's been living under a rock and doesn't know, it's been going since 1986?
Me and Raw Dog like to count 85 because that was the year that we backpacked the first Barkley Loop to see if it could be done.
Right. And how did that go?
The first 7 miles took us 10 hours.
Oh, no.
It used to be really rough. No one had been on those trails since, I think, the 1930s. They had been sitting there for 50 years. And so there was a lot of blowdowns and overgrowth.
Why was that? Why had nobody touched the trail since the 1930s?
In the 1930s, you had the Great Depression, and they set up the CCC, the WPA, these places that are these construction, I guess not really companies, but the government would set up camps, and they did all kinds of public works projects. If you're in the U.S. and do journey runs, you can recognize the WPA work that is still standing today. A lot of the U.S.'s infrastructure was really built up during that time. The Great Depression was probably one of the best things that ever happened to the U.S. in the long run, because that was how they approached it. And your trails at the Grand Canyon, they're all WPA trails. The ones at Frozen Head were CCC. And when we were hiking the trails, it was just a forest then. And you could see around the perimeter these trails where the contour lines looked like shading. And someone had sat in an office and just drawn trails up on a map with utter disregard for where they went. I mean, they're nonsensical, idiotic trails. No one, your trails, you know how they follow the land, like cattle trails and people trails. You don't take the worst possible way, but they just went from here to there. And we said, man, we've got to come back and do those someday. And you look at them in a circle, and you think it doesn't quite make a marathon. It's only about 20 miles. But what a marathon it would be. So we got out and we backpacked it one weekend. And as we were struggling up and down those hills and through all the stuff, and really with a trail that hadn't been used in 50 miles, anytime you got near water, you had to really do a good job with your map to pick it back up coming out the other side.
Wow.
And we said, what a race this would make. What kind of fun would people have out here?
At that time, not only would there have been a lot less ultra runs around, a lot less races available, but there can't have been any that looked like that, surely. Like, the impression I get was that a lot of the original ultra races and stuff was sort of road races and stuff, not what you were proposing was a difficult distance in an incredibly difficult place.
It was mostly road races, and really people said the trail racing was just really getting started, although some of the guys like Ken Young had been doing them out in Arizona since the 70s and early 70s. But the trail running was the oddball thing, and most everybody ran road ultras, and then they would say, well, they don't run trails because trails will injure you. The same way now people say they don't run roads because roads will injure you. Running is run. If you are a runner, you run everywhere. If you only run one thing, you're part of a runner. But yeah, it was quite different. In the early days, we had a certain number of people who were kind of angry when they got there and found out what it was like. But the word spread, and people that appealed to got to be the ones coming. And then it took several years for someone to finish, which, and to ultra runners today or then are the same. If no one's finishing, but it looks like it could be done, you've got to, I'm the one that could do it. That's what you think.
Well, that first person that crossed the line, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but aren't they supposed to have crossed the line and somebody said to them, well, now you've ruined it for everybody? Because then nobody could say anymore, well, this race is impossible, so if I pull out at the third lap, I've done well.
Mark Williams from the UK, he was number one, and David Horton was there, who took ultimately, I think, 11 tries to finish it.
Wow.
He was when he met him at the gate and said, "Now you've ruined it for everybody." He said, "Every year I come and I fail and I go home and I think, yeah, it's okay because it can't be done."
Until somebody does.
Until someone did it.
This is good. You were on the money, because I've heard it. I've heard you say a few times in other interviews that what you were looking to do was set up a race that was right at that outer edge of what somebody could do. Were there times between 1985 and when that first person finished when you thought, I might have gone a bit far here, I don't know if anyone's ever going to do it?
No, of course, you make adjustments in the course every year.
Yeah.
So that it's always, everybody had, even the most familiar with it people hit points with it they're not really sure. And so you kind of dial it in as you go. And as the people improve the equipment and the technique and the approach and the way that they do it, the humans as a entity, the ultra runners, have really upped their game since it was first held. I think that the early courses, people would knock them out with much greater ease, but the state of the art thing was a carbide lamp, like the miners wear. All you had for flashlights are the great big bulky things with giant batteries that last about an hour. And so the people approach, they talk, they figure things out, they improve their game. It's been fun.
I'm not sure everybody involved in the race can say that, but as an event, it still manages to attract runners. And you know, I told you before we started recording that I work on the spine, so I've met a lot of the guys that are in and around the podium on the spine race, and some of them have been over and done the Barkleys as well, and you know, with varying levels of success. And I've watched incredibly tough runners get eaten alive on your course, but they still keep wanting to go back. They still want to see if they can catch that snitch. You know, I'm sorry I threw in a Harry Potter reference for the geeks, but it's happened.
It gets in your blood. It's because you can see it can be done, and there's a lot of different skill sets involved, which is sometimes why you see people that are really, really good athletes that do very good at this kind of stuff. But if they have a weakness, then the Barkley will go after it and just break them down. And so the kind of people that it appeals to, I said in the early days, there were people who came and they were just mad because it was so hard. But the other ones, they'll do it and things will occur. The weather will turn the way the weather can turn, and you feel bad for him. You think it's really not fair. He was so well, he was so capable of it, and things went wrong that were beyond his control. And they say, I've just got to get better. That's the Barkley mindset of someone that's going to finish. No matter what happens, there's never injustice. It's just, I have to improve. I have to figure out how I solve that problem too.
And you've had some really attention-grabbing near misses as well, haven't you? I know Gary Robbins is the one that everyone comes back to. But so Gary Robbins is the one that everybody knows because he was so close to the end of that fifth loop. And also, from what I've read about what Gary Robbins wrote afterwards, he had a similar attitude to what you're saying there. He was incredibly gracious about the whole thing. You know, it wasn't an injustice that had happened to him. He just wasn't going the right way, and he was in a bad condition, and things didn't go his way. But
it's agonizing. Everything hard was done. It was a 2-mile downhill stretch into the finish. It would be like someone collapsing at the spine, or someone at the spine getting just around the last corner from seeing the finish line and off into the hinterlands.
Man, I should know this because I worked there, but not last year, the year before. We had a guy who was in second position and pulled up 4 kilometers from the end of that 450-kilometer race. It can happen, man. But Gary Robbins is one that everybody knows about, because once the film had come out about the race in 2014, and honestly, if you're listening to this and you haven't watched Barkley Marathons, the race that eats its young yet, just press pause and go and do that now and then come back, because that'll make this make a lot more sense. But people know about Gary Robbins because it happened sort of after 2014, and the world at large now has realized that there's this amazing thing going on in the middle of the woods in Frozen State Park. What were there stories like that earlier that we haven't come to know? Were there any other near misses in the earlier years?
The David Horton glasses story. He was deep into the race, into the fourth loop. He had built up a huge time reservoir. The weather was, although it's subject to change within hours, the weather was favorable enough, and it really looked like he had it. And he sat down to eat next to a stream, and he got up and he went the next 100 yards to where the next turn was. He sat in a sheltered place and then went on, and he got to the next turn and realized he'd set his glasses down. And his vision was not sufficient to see the map without his glasses. And he went back and he searched for hours. But I see you have glasses, and unless they're just because glasses are so attractive, the thing
Absolutely.
that happens when you put your glasses down and you don't have your glasses, you can't find your glasses.
Yeah, it's the most confounding thing that happens in any glassing wearer's person's life. I need my glasses to find my glasses. But, I'm sitting in my front room and that's frustrating. He's in the middle of the Barkley Marathons. That's horrendous.
And Andrew Thompson got into the 5th lap, and about halfway around, he forgot what he was doing.
Oh, man.
He just stopped and was sitting there by this big puddle, place called Coffin Springs that the course doesn't currently go by there, but it used to. And he was just sitting there squishing his feet in the mud, and like 4 or 5 hours went by and the time limit caught him.
Oh, man.
And then it's like it clicked. Oh my God, I'm in a race.
This sounds crazy, but I've heard almost exactly the same story from a couple of runners on the Spine who are like, they'd catch themselves in the early hours of the morning and stop dead because they have no idea why they are where they are. It's a Monday. I'm supposed to be at work. Why am I in the middle of this field? Right? Sleep deprivation does very strange things.
And you're faced with a terrible decision at the Barkley. Do you try to buy enough time by going faster to get a nap, or do you risk everything by trying to do it with no sleep, but back off enough for your body to survive? Because unfortunately, the Barkley puts you in a position where most of the time the needle is right on the red line. I don't know if redlining is a thing in the UK, but
yeah,
in the US, you know exactly how long can I keep the needle right in the edge of the red line before my motor blows up? And you don't have much choice.
It's very much how John Kelly described it. When I asked him what the difference was between the Spine and the Barkley Marathons, he just said, the Spine holds you to the wheel for longer, but your race holds you to the wheel more intensely. And there's no room. If you've got 12 hours to do each lap, when do you plan in a sleep?
That's where people really get confused about the Barkley. And they look at the time limit and they look at the distance, and in their mind, it's like, this is just being willing to trudge for a really long time. And the part they miss is that The time limit is set up where if you understand the math of the day loops and the night loops and stuff, from the very beginning, you have no cushion. So the time limit is snapping at your heels because the people that are going to finish, they understand how the time works. And you're having to push yourself and red line just constantly be at even though you might not cover a mile in an hour and a half, you're working really hard to get it done because you're just going straight up the side of a mountain through the brush.
Well, I've got to ask then, when those trails that you first went out and trudged in 1985 that had been drawn on the map by seemingly an insane person who'd never seen a hill before, have you adapted much from them, or is it still very much, that you pick and choose tough routes? The
place is full of trails. You've got those trails, which were actually built trails. They're really pretty good. They cut them 4 feet wide into the side of the mountain.
Wow.
Regardless of how they went. And of course, there's places where they've eroded away, but they're by and large, they're good trails. And there's a whole network of those. And then you have the old logging roads and mining roads and old rail beds where they went up in there mining coal and timbering it a century ago. You've got the woodsman's tracks and deer trails, and now that the pigs are there, you've got the pig trails. And
maybe not as much fun to follow behind.
There's a lot of trails out there to work with, and a lot of them are really difficult to take. You have to have a pretty good woodsman's eye for seeing where the trail is. I know you get out there with people that all they can do is make a compass bearing and go. And that's really the worst way to do it, because there are trails, and if you see them, it's a lot easier to follow the way that the animal tracks go than to just go right straight through everything. If nothing else, the underbrush around the bottom half of your body is somewhat cleared out because animals go through there.
Yeah. And I think that's an aspect of this race that for a lot of people who are, newer to the ultra running scene, every one of us, I've got 3 GPS devices in my front room now, and I'm not going to go somewhere that I'm not very familiar with without being pre-armed with that kind of equipment. And that's kind of become the norm. Whereas you strip back all of that, don't you? Nobody runs with that kind of equipment. Have you thought about leaning away from that, or will you always stick to the map and compass?
No, you get rid of all your electronics. You cut off that connection. I know that a lot of, like the spine, I think that they have to wear a tracker there.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the common thing in Europe and probably in the U.S. And if we didn't have this long-standing tradition, but there is a freedom. You remove all the electronics. They put that stuff on you and they say, well, it only tracks you. You don't know you can't use it to tell where you are. It only tracks you. But there is still the comfort. You're still connected. When they go out in the Barkley, they sign on for and do it willingly. That no, when you walk around the corner into the woods from camp, no one will know where you are until you get back.
Man, I don't think anyone could set up a race quite like this anymore. I don't see how it could be done. Like,
if we hadn't done it up forever, I think that, and every year I'm thinking this will be the year that they come and say, "Oh, you gotta have a tracker." No, you should be able to sign on to not be safe.
Yeah.
What use is going into the wilderness with a tether? It's like a bicycle with safety wheels.
Yeah, well, until my map reading gets better, Laz, I'm going to have to stick with my GPS devices for a while. I hope you don't blame me too much for that. I mean, there's a lot more that I could ask you about the Barkleys, but that's by no means your only race these days, is it? You've got the Big's Backyard became bigger, didn't it? So when did Big's Backyard begin? Also, you've got to tell, who's Big?
big as my dot. He's right there.
Oh my God, he's here.
You can see him. Is visible on the
No, not quite, but we'll take your word for it.
big guy. Now can you see him?
Just about.
That's about as far from me as he ever wants to be.
I'm really glad we got to meet Big.
He is my assistant, and it's preferred that he is within arm's length at all times. Because that's what he does. Yeah, we moved out here to the farm, and there's about 140, 150 acres. And it's mostly woods. And we held the big race called the Big's Backyard Ultra, but it was just a regular time ultra, and you had the limited space we had to work with. You can get about 4 miles of trails into this amount of space. And we thought about it in between that one and the second one, that what can we do to have a really good ultra in the space we have with just the resources of a family. And the backyard ultra format came out of that, and boy, it really caught on. Yeah,
it really caught on. I mean, it's after you setting up the Barkleys, it's very you, the Big's Backyard Ultra. It's another means of testing people in a way that, hang on, you know what? I wrote something down here. I'm going to go back to my notes. There was also one of the people I work with pretty regularly is an American runner called Adam Kimball. So I'm going to shout out to Kimball Door right now. I hope you're listening, mate. And I asked him, what do you want me to ask Laz about? And he wanted to hear more about the poetry that you write during these events. And it steered me towards this quote that I hope you wrote about Big's Backyard, which was that it's one thing to run 100 miles and start once, but it is another to run 100 miles and have to start 24 times. And putting it that way really sums up Big's Backyard for me. It is last person standing on, and no matter how you're feeling, at the start of the next hour, you have to be ready to do your 4 mile loop. Is that about right?
You have to have, you don't have a great hour, any hour, but you have to have a good hour every hour. If you falter, you're gone. It's merciless. It's a really fun race. Yeah. But in the end, when it gets down to the few, it's a matter of who can retain their hope the longest. I thought starting out, people would run and you would just run to where you ran out of gas and couldn't go on. But that's not how it ends up at all. People run until they no longer believe they can win. It's entirely in your head.
Wow.
And there's a lot of poker in it. I know you've gone to ultras and people show you their wounds and tell you how beat up they are and all this stuff. No, in the backyard, you can't show weakness. Weakness feeds your opponent. You want them to believe they can't beat you, because as long as they believe they can beat you, they won't quit. And if they don't quit, you can't stop.
It's a really compelling race, because whereas the Barkley Marathons very much push people against the wilderness, and you have to endure that for as long as possible. It's very much you're in your own head and doing your own thing. This race is pitting people very much against the will of somebody else. If you happen to have entered and there's somebody with the same abilities as you and the same level of determination, then that race is going to go on until somebody collapses, surely.
It gets, Biggs has been, when it caught on and everybody started all these other backyard races, I thought, well, the little race in my backyard here on the farm is going to be eclipsed by the big corporate. Everybody has fancy websites and nicer stuff, and we're kind of homemade out here. And but they kept coming. And now the fields that come, you look at it and you think, I can't imagine any of these people giving up. But everybody has a break point, and they get out there, and it goes on for days, and they won't quit. And it's, you look through the field, and you have 75 runners, and hell, 60 of them could possibly win. You know, if you have a world championship in the 800 meters, you can take that field. They're all world class, but you can narrow it down to what, 5 or 6 that have an actual chance to win.
Sure.
And you know it's down to 1 or 2. And most of the time, there's just one guy. He's on top of the world right now. You know he's going to win. The backyard, every time, they're not that much difference how fast they are. It's just how much they can endure that weekend. What, not have something go wrong, or just, so it's very exciting. And you don't know, as it goes along, it narrows down to fewer and fewer people, but they all could win.
Yeah.
Nobody's showing any weakness. They all appear to feel great. Even if they're going to, the lap before they quit, they're still
just still psych out the opponents.
Well, what happened? You look great. I've been dying for hours.
So nobody tells the truth at a backyard ultra.
It's a half running, half poker.
Well, it's an idea that seems to have caught on a lot. I was having a look at the Big's Backyard sort of website earlier, and I know this year, obviously, every race around the world has been affected by what's going on with COVID, but there were already going to be like over 30 golden ticket backyard events this year.
Yes,
worldwide.
At the time when it broke loose, there were, I think, 118 backyard ultras affiliated with Big's in 36 countries.
Incredible.
It's, well, you don't need any real resources to put one on.
No, what you've created there, in trying to create something in your own backyard, you've created somebody that anybody can, as long as they've got a space with a 4-mile loop in it. Yeah, so thank you for that. Well done. Now I'm going to have to go and run one of them as well.
It's not on the list because they hadn't finished put it together yet, but they were talking about doing one in London that goes down the Thames and crosses some famous bridge and back down across another famous bridge. There's a soccer stadium there with a parking lot and footpaths down both sides. The crossings on the bridge, you got a 4-mile loop. You can adjust it to the exact distance in that parking lot, put it on at a time when that stadium's not in use. You got everything.
If somebody puts that together next year when we're all out of lockdown, that'll be huge.
I thought that would be so cool, going up and down the Thames and crossing the bridges. It would be a lot of fun.
It might be too much fun. I mean, is that in keeping with the spirit of it?
Oh no, they're all fun until they're not.
Yeah.
That's what the big saying about the backyard ultra, because the pace is so modest. And really, once you figure it out, they lay out courses that are easy, because the easier the course, the harder the race. And they say it's easy until it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you put one on hills where that it reaches a point that people can't make the time limit, then that lets them off light. If you've got a course that's pretty much flat and it's easy to make the time limit, your only way out is to quit.
Man.
There are no mercy killings.
I sat and watched as a spectator a 24-hour track event a couple of years ago, and it's just steadily watching people grind themselves to pieces on the tarmac, because you're not going to come across a hill that you'll be able to say, oh, it was too much, my knee's gone because of that hill. You know, you're not going to trip over anything. If you stop, it's because you decided you'd had enough.
It makes you look yourself in the eye and take.
Yeah.
But it's comforting to see the kind of great fields and the great runners that are in here, that we're all human. Everybody has a breaking point.
And it's kind of fascinating as well that, you know, if you look at the Barkley Marathons, that's 40 people a year that you have there, like 35 to 40. And only a few people are ever going to be able to be in a position where they're selected and they can do it. But a lot of these backyard ultras are really tapping into how many people there are out there that want to go and test themselves against something like this. People really do seem to get something out of the suffering. People, they've started calling it type 2 fun.
It's a lot of fun to expand your boundaries. We are explorers by nature, but there's not a lot of stuff around for us to explore. But in space is limited, and you can find places in your head that you never dreamed were there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a new trans.
So one thing I did want to ask, obviously the backyard thing's taken off. They're now cropping up all over the world. Anyone who's got a pair of running shoes, the chances are they've watched one documentary or another about the Barkleys. This is so far away from where you were when you were in the ultra running scene in the 70s and 80s. Does this notoriety bother you? Would you rather have that anonymity again?
Well, I live out here in the woods, and the only people that I see is when I'm out doing my miles, and they drive by, roll down the window and talk for a minute. So I know that at an airport, or maybe at the grocery store, restaurant, or the few times I go to town, sometimes people see you and then they're, "Hey, aren't you the Barkley guy?" And it's little enough that it's just kind of amusing, but it's enough that you think, "Whoa, if you were really famous, it would suck."
Yeah, I bet. But also with the amount of people that you're attracting to the scene now, like it's not just people you meet face to face. The people who are interested in your races now number in the hundreds of thousands around the world.
Isn't that strange? I'm glad none of this happened when I was 30, because I don't think it would have had a good effect on me, but I'm far enough along in life to realize that sometimes things happen and it's just a confluence of different factors over which you really had no control. Somebody was going to be at this point, when there's so many people who are right out there that are receptive to the idea of challenging themselves. And so it just happened by chance that it was me. And at any time that could just kind of fade away, and this time will go on, and I'll still be out here in the woods by myself doing the things that I like to do. So
I love it. You're still getting to balance the sort of lifestyle that you enjoy against this worldwide notoriety that you've got. And I hope you don't mind me bringing it up, but John Kelly published some words of yours about the relationship between the media and the wilderness earlier this year. And for someone who works in the media in the wilderness, it was absolutely fascinating to hear me say it, because you maintain this mystery around the Barkley Marathons because it's something that you do have to put a little effort in to watch and to feel like you're a part of it. It's a little bit removed, but not in a way that it would have been 15 years ago. Like I can Google it now and find 100 photos taken during the race and some video taken from during the race. And there must be runners. I know I had quite a long chat with John Kelly about it, he obviously enjoys the isolation and the quiet of being out in the wilderness. And sometimes it's a little jarring that there's these people buzzing around wanting to capture those stories and beam them out there. How does that work with you on the Barkleys? Like, was there initially a time where you were like, no, I'm not having photographers here? we're not going to make a documentary?
We eschewed all media coverage up until either 2000 or 2001, when the a faction within the state government made a concentrated and focused effort to throw us out.
Really?
And yeah, we go to wilderness areas, and that's the reason for the small number of runners, and the way that it's done is all so that we can. There's not much wilderness left. I mean, the basic Barkley experience, that was my childhood. It was available everywhere. We got maps and went on backpacking trips up into the mountains, and it was a thing to do. But the places that I used to go, that if they're not a park, they're gone.
Wow.
So you want to preserve it, but the idea that you preserve the wilderness and allow no one to go there makes no sense. Not everyone can go. There's not enough wilderness left for everyone to go. So you have to select down to the number of people that are sustainable without making a big impact, and put them through. And that's what we were talking about. The media has the chance to carry that message to everyone else. Now, the balancing point at the Barkley is that the media doesn't get to go that many places.
No.
If you watch the documentary that they had, has very little actual on-course footage in a very limited number of places. But it's kind of like Alfred Hitchcock. What you can tell the story without showing the knife going into the body.
Yeah.
And so then there's been a lot of really talented people out there and do stories and stuff on the Barkley, which has built it. Back on what you'd asked, though, after 2001, when they made that effort to throw us out, fortunately, a lot of the Barkley people are really very successful people with a lot of connection. And we were able to, the state people in the state legislature were hearing from like the Secretary of the Navy saying, what's going on down there? Why? And so we got enough political pressure to get to continue the race. But I realized then we have to exist. As long as we're an anonymous secret event that no one knows about except people on the inside, then we are always susceptible to being thrown out. So when media people started asking about coming, we'd say, okay, and they'd come and do various stories and stuff. And then the documentary hit, and now we have to say, well, this is how many media people will fit in camp, and cut it off at the number of people that can be there. But the media has been very good.
Yeah, I mean, from what I've watched over the last few years of keeping an eye on the Barkley, I think you tread a very careful line there very well between allowing enough out there to keep people engaged and wanting to follow the story, but not showing them the knife going in, as it were. You know, the runners still get to feel that they are isolated out there.
Well, they are. You go by the fire tower, which is one of the media access points, and that's a place you can't cross the park without going by anyway. And it's open to the public. The park is not closed during the race. So there's with everybody up there, there's more people than there might ordinarily be, but it's not a place where you want to see somebody anyway. You weren't likely to. The rest of the time, they're pretty much out there on their own. It's one of the things you have, because me always, we can put a film, we can put a camera here, and they just won't say anything as the runners go by. They won't help. Now, the presence of a person is a trail mark, and a big part of being in the wilderness, the experience of the Barkley is never being really sure if you're on the right trail.
Yeah, I see what you mean. If I jump out from behind a tree in my bright red t-shirt and glasses, then everyone's going to know where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, it's I've tried to treat the media with respect, like we talked about. I think that they have an important part, that people that sit at home who really would never have a desire to do the Barkley, they see some value that wilderness still exists. And the wilderness badly needs a constituency. The concept of just walling it off and letting no one in there. Then when someone wants the mineral resources that are under the ground, who's going to stand up for it? Who's going to say, nah, hollow trees have value because they're valuable habitat for animals. And having a place everybody can't go is worth doing.
And I think you are absolutely right in what you say there. If you had complete anonymity for the race, that would mean complete anonymity for the area that you're running through as well. Whereas you've created now, I mean, I've never been to where the Barkley Marathons is, but I have an image of it in my head that's something like Mordor now. It's like Middle Earth. It's this fantastical place. And if I was to hear tomorrow that there was something that was threatening it, there'd be fury. And you've created a sort of a group of people now that feel in some way connected, like that person that handed you a bottle in the middle of 1,000 kilometers of running. They now feel like they're a little bit of the story that you've created. No, I just think that's great. Well done.
And there were so many of those people. It would really astound you how many times walking out there in the desert or in the mountains, just with I carry my walking stick like this so I can hang my arms on it. And the car will just drive up and the window goes down and out comes a bottle of ice cold water. And then on they go. They see someone that could use a drink and they give them one.
Because on the whole, people aren't that bad. That's the message I'm taking from that.
A lot of those cars that drive up, if you were out there and just saw them drive up in their old beat up car or truck and rough looking people, and you might wonder what's up, but after a while you're used to it. The window will come down and out's a bottle of cold water. These are people that do hard physical work outdoors all day. They got their cooler of water for a reason, and they see someone thirsty, their natural instinct is to give them something to drink.
Yeah, absolutely. Laz, when is there going to be a book? That's what I want to know. I got the books about Big.
There's 5 books about the big dog and his exciting life. He's really an unusual dog. He's moved a little closer now. He was out of reach.
Yeah, you knew you were talking about him.
And the one about basketball. And it's when you write a book, it provides you with like an income for life, $3 a month. So
it'd still be more than you make out of the Barkley, right? It's just that
more than I make at the Barkley.
You have a knowledge of the area and the history of where that race is and of the race itself, and an understanding of the relationship between the people that are fans of the race and every aspect of it. That if this was a book, if this was written down, Laz, I'd buy it tomorrow, is what I'm saying.
Well, I know books take time. The ones that I wrote, it was just because they were put into books, but it was just stuff that I'd already written, if that makes any sense. I took a bunch of stuff with encouragement and put it all together, and then a guy who does books and knows books went through and pointed out where there's gaps where that you need to tie things together. So you write just a few additional small chapters so that there's a complete story. And then they put it out there, and every month you get your royalty check for about $3. And lots of good reviews, and the people that read them love them. But books need to be done with something you've already written.
I get what you mean. Well, make sure your technical advisor sends over some links for where people can pick up the books and stuff. I'll make sure it's in the description and everything. And for everyone listening at home, if honestly, I know I've said it already, but if you haven't already watched some of the documentaries about the race, then go and do it. And the next time there is a Barkley Marathons, and we've all got our fingers crossed for next year, pay attention, because something absolutely inspirational is happening in the deep dark woods there.
But if you watch the official Twitter, which is so mostly all gets out of the woods, all you'll get is enough information to tantalize you, and never enough to really.
It's perfect. It's enough information to tantalize you into wanting to sit there and stare at your screen waiting for the next tweet to appear, and potentially to tip you over the edge into going out there and doing something ridiculous yourself. And I think that's where a lot of the value comes in the stories that come out of a race like yours. It's not that people... I mean, I don't think for a second I could hit one loop of the 5 that you've set up in that race. But I come back to thinking about the people who have gone that far when I'm out there and I'm having a hard time on, a 5 or a 10 mile trail run. It's like, hang on, I know that I can do better than this, because I know people have done 100 times more than this. And I agree with that. It's not just that the stories that come out of an event like this are great for this constituency of the wilderness that you talked about, but they're inspirational for people just seeing what your runners have gone through, which means that you've become this sort of very, very positive figure, despite also being seen as one of the most sadistic race directors on the planet.
The people bring the pain on themselves. They had every opportunity to turn away. Now, the Barkley documentary, the first big one that really caught on, one thing about it was that I think there's so many good running documentaries out there, but they're about runners, by runners, for runners.
Yeah.
The crew that came out and did this had absolutely zero previous experience with running, not track, not cross country, not ultras, not road races, nothing. So they looked at it with the eyes that just general people would. They asked the questions that regular people would ask, and looked at it from that standpoint. I think that's why it became so immensely popular, because it wasn't from the standpoint of a runner. It's someone on the outside looking in. And then they especially tell me, and I also get stuff myself, a fascinating side effect was so many people will write and say, I've always wanted to start my own business. I had this business I wanted to start and be in, but I never would do it because I was afraid I would fail. All these people go out and they know they'll probably fail, and they're not discouraged. And said, why not take a chance on failing? Because you can't succeed if you risk failing. And it applies in so many different parts of life that it's. I know that Tim and Monica that did the film, they said that's the most rewarding thing is they hear from people more than you would ever dream that say, I watched something totally unrelated and thought, why not take a chance in my life?
That's amazing. You've created a race that teaches people that it's worthwhile going out there and pushing yourself to take on something that you might fail at. Because everyone who comes into your race knows that there's a good chance they're going home.
Yeah, what's another byproduct of being a mediocre runner? I think if anyone that's been in athletics, whether your level is just the average level, or you advance to a certain point, you reach a point where you're not going to have the success that you thought you should have. And does it become, was it worthless for me to train and run all these years when I have not really anything credible as a runner to show for it? Well, yeah, it was, because the fun was in the journey. The fun was in trying. When you run the 119 and you think, by God, I can do a 115. I can do that. Because you never know when you run the best race of your life. You never get to really celebrate it because you always think you have something better. And then years later you realize, oh shit, that was the best race I ever ran.
Wow. Well,
I should have had a party.
Well, lads, I've got to say, I'm going to wind it up there because I don't want to steal too much of your day, but it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
I really appreciate you talking to me, because Big is a better listener, but he doesn't add much to the conversation.
Yeah, well, in that case, I can take away from this that I brightened up your morning a little bit, lads. That's great. I'll have that printed on a t-shirt. Honestly, thank you very much, and keep doing crazy things. And once you've done your north to south, your next big trans-con, I'll get in touch again, because I'd love another opportunity to talk to you.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on. It was a privilege.